This system's unmuted and ready to go, and I want to kick this off, Mr. Mayor.
Is Pam Yancey in the room?
Yes, I am, Mayor.
Pam, would you run this meeting, please? You okay with that?
I do. I sure would be good with doing that.
Thank you.
All right, let's call this meeting to order. Can you do roll call, please?
Denham. Here. Fenton.
Here.
LeBlanc. Pinkley. Williams.
Here.
Yancey.
Here.
Stepp. Milton. Milton.
Here.
Committee member Yancey, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Let's get started, and I believe the next thing is the utility rate model. Is that right? Am I looking at it right?
Yes.
And so, Kendall, you're up.
All right, well, good morning. Good morning, Mr. Mayor and committee members. So I'm here before you again after our last meeting. It was asked that staff would go back and look at options for the water sewer rates, as I had presented a 10% rate increase across the board on the water side and a 6% rate increase across the board on the sewer side. And so there was some concerns expressed during that meeting, and so I went back and we got with the team, got with our finance department, got with Cherie and Ben, and also with Administrator Stepp and Alex and the mayor. We had a discussion and talked about our options, and one of those options was how could we subsidize the water and sewer funds by another means, and we talked about the tourism tax and how the tourism tax was designated for infrastructure replacements, and so we determined that you can't use the tourism tax for operations and maintenance itself, right? And so then we also talked about maybe subsidizing with the general fund. With the general funds doing well, is a possibility to subsidize with that, and in an effort to keep rates at a lower level, rate increases at a lower level. However, when we discussed that and the challenges that come with that is once you start subsidizing, then you have to do that from year to year. It starts compounding on itself, right? And in the event that your subsidy source runs out or runs dry or low, then that could put the water and sewer funds or operations at risk. And that's when you'd have a much larger increase to make up that difference from years of subsidy. And so that's what the design of the water sewer rate model came into play when we hired an outside engineer, was to build resiliency and strength into the water sewer funds so that we could keep up with operations and maintenance by rates and projecting out what those future expenses are going to be, and so with that, that we came through our discussion with staff and determination that what's our other options, right? So the big concern I heard was the rate increase on the water side for residentials, and with a 10% rate increase on the residential side, it was combined with the sewer billing, it was roughly $2.57 of monthly increase on their billings. So I looked at options. How else could we split up that that rate of increase between residential and commercial? So going back and looking at the commercial side, we could, instead of doing a 10% increase for residential, we could raise that amount of increase on the commercial side and to offset a reduction on the residential side. So what I'll do is I'm going to jump forward and actually let me pause on that statement. I would like to start my presentation over with the methodology in mind that we're going to look at on the water side, since it's we was originally proposing a 10% rate increase to actually split that differently between residential and commercial, and I'll show you that as we get to my slides here. So I wanted to recap because we have a pause here in the last meeting, so I wanted to recap on my slides, and then we'll get to the actual percentage proposals again. And so just to recap on water capitals that are funded by rates. Again, we also looked at during that discussion of, could we use tourism funds for these water capitals that are funded by rates? And one of the items I wanted to point out during our discussions was the intent of the rate model is provide a good self-sustaining utility. In the event that tourism was to slow down or the general fund sources was to slow down, the water and sewer department could still function and operate by just existing with the existing components. So the only way we can do that is if we can keep the rate model up to a pace that we'll be able to fund those upcoming replacement capitals. And as we talked about it, if tourism did slow down or the amount of usage slowed down, then the wear and tear on those pumps and equipment does slow down as well. So there is a trade-off there in that. So the amount, I guess the rate of replacement of those capital would hopefully be extended out a little bit further, and the rates would settle out a little bit more. But it was determined that it wouldn't be good to subsidize with tourism tax because, again, if you get yourself subsidized on just normal operations and capital replacements of existing components, then we wouldn't be able to keep up in future and possibly cause even greater rate hikes. So we have roughly $900,000 in water replacement capitals on average for the next 5 years. And that's keeping up with normal pumps and equipment, electrical components, and then you got vehicles and things of that nature as well. Similar on the sewer side, it's a little bit more expensive. We were just over $1 million on average each year for the next 5 years. And then I highlighted the upcoming tourism water sewer capital projects, and this is what we've proposed as a 5-year plan, which includes items like your 76 corridor water main replacements, your downtown water system replacements, also your neighborhood subdivision improvements. So we've expressed the concerns about our neighborhoods and the amount of water leaks we're having, and so this also includes that as well. And so when you total up the projects, we're roughly $62 million worth of projects over the next 5 years, or excuse me, just under $60 million in projects over the next 5 years. And if you look at the rate, the average or historical rate of tourism dollars that comes to Branson, we're about $12.5 million each year. So we'd have roughly captured in that 5-year period around $62 million. 25% of that goes to marketing, so you take off $15.5 million. So we're down really available funds of around $47 million that could go towards our projects. And again, we have, with today's projected cost, we're going to exceed what we're going to potentially capture in over the next 5 years. So as we continue year to year, we'll watch over that, and we obviously want to pay as we go as much as possible. I think that's kind of the theme we've been trying to aim for. However, we'll just have to reassess our priorities and evaluate where we're at from each year to each year as funds come in. And so on the residential water rates, what we looked at was splitting out the across-the-board 10% water increase to a 3% on the residential side and a 12% on the commercial side. So with dropping the residential down to 3%, it causes our commercial rate increase to jump up to 12% in itself. We also looked at our reserves and our target levels, and we're required at a minimum to keep a 20% reserve in those accounts. And so we're trying to draw down those reserves, but still draw them down at a rate that we can not impact the users by having to have a large increase. We've looked at looked at a 3% commercial rate increase along with the residential. However, when you do that, you're in 2025 and 2026, you'd have a pretty substantial rate increase just to get us back up to where we need to be at. It was closer to around 30%, if I remember right, just to get us offsetted back into the right direction. So we take the approach of slowly drawing down reserves in conjunction with a decent rate increase to create a trend to get us plateaued out to where we're hovering between 20 to 30% on our reserves. And that's because, too, if you look at our capitals or replacement equipment each year, some years are, say, around 600,000, some years are just over $1 million. And so we tried to average that out as much as possible. We try to even that up across from year to year so that we can keep our reserves down at a decent level and not have to prepare for those spikes and replacements of each year, if that makes sense. So we're leaning, we're recommending again 3% on the water side and 12% on, or yeah, 12% or 3% on the residential water side and 12% on the commercial water side. And then on sewer, the consensus was 6% was acceptable in our conversations and across the board for both water and sewer, or for both residential and commercial. So we're going to recommend a 6% for 2024 in itself. So what's that look like in their billings? When you look at the chart on the left here, it's for, say, a residential 3/4 inch meter. You'll see our 2023 in blue and 2024 in the orangish color. And down below, and these are based off of a 5,000 gallons per month usage on average. So for a combined water and sewer billing, for 2023, it was $39.87 for 5,000 gallons of use. With the proposed 3% rate increase on the water side and 6% on the sewer, that'd bring it to $40.98, so a $1.11 difference in their monthly billing. On the commercial side, it actually raised the difference because of loading up the commercial with the rate increase from a 10 to a 12%. So the difference between their combined billings, this is for an example of a 2-inch water meter. We have a lot of 2-inch meters on commercial properties in Branson, so we like to use that size as a comparison. And so we compare 100,000 gallons of usage a month. So between 2023, it'd be $1,120.54, and then in 2024, with the proposed rate increases, it moved to $1,216.34. So a difference of $95.80. So what's that do for just comparisons of other cities? We actually do a water and sewer rate study every year of approximately 90 cities. We have our staff poll those cities and pull their information. to see where we fall within those areas. And so locally, on the commercial side for water rates, we're edging towards the top, and you'll see us in yellow there in the upper left-hand chart. If you look at the local area residential water rates, we're down towards the bottom. You'll see 4 or 5 of us there, 6 of us are real close together. We're into yellow again on that bottom left chart. And then we also like to do a utilities using surface water treatment and biological wastewater treatment to give us a more an apples-to-apples comparison with some cities. So it takes more funds, more operating costs to run a surface water treatment plant, and also our biological wastewater treatment system. So if you look at, we're on the far right there in the yellow, we're at the low end of all those cities that use similar size or similar type of treatment that we do. And if you look at the local residential sewer rates, we are at the bottom of the chart there on the right in yellow. And then if you look at the local area commercial rates, we're kind of upper end, but more towards the middle there, and that's in the yellow again as well. Any questions you guys have for me today?
Kendall, I wasn't at the at the last meeting, so I wasn't part of those discussions, but it sounds like previously you had the rate increase was the same for both residential and commercial. One of the concerns I have when I look at the burn rate on the reserves, by keeping the residential at 3%, in 5 years, we're under 20% reserves.
That is correct, yeah. However, 5 years is a ways out there.
Sure.
We like to look at 5 years because it helps us plan and project. That number can fluctuate a little bit. Generally, I try not to show a 19% at a 5 year mark. I like to keep the reserves all above the 20%. But on the water side, we've actually we've got a little bit of changes coming around on the water side, and a lot to do with the water shutoff agreement we have with Public Water District 3. So all those delinquencies, penalties and interest is funneled over into the water account itself, even on the sewer billings. And so that's starting to steady out, and we're starting to see a slight increase in some of our water revenues, so to speak, for this year. So I'd like to see where that lands at for the end of this year, and that'll help us project. And I'm thinking we're going to come out better than that 19% in the 5-year projection. But until I get more information and we finish this year out, I can't positively say that one way or the other. But
Sure, yeah, and obviously that is a long time away, and things can change. But I guess my bigger concern is, to me, this looks like we're sort of, and I get, we don't want to make this more expensive for people that live here, but now we're saying, well, sorry, businesses, you're going to have to pick up the difference. And I think that I don't know, it's not sitting well with me that we're saying, okay, well, to keep it, level for the residents who are paying a pretty low rate as it is. And I think you and we've talked about that before. I mean, it's already low, and now it feels like we're punishing businesses to offset that. And I understand why you brought it this way. It just doesn't feel right to me to say, well, businesses, you make more money, or you maybe have more discretionary income, and so we're going to charge you more. But do they? I mean, salaries are higher, costs are higher, everything's just more expensive, but we're just passing that cost off to the businesses.
to give you some comparison numbers, the amount of revenue that we would capture from a residential 10% increase versus a residential 3% increase. So the residential 10% increase would produce roughly around $100,000 of revenue, additional revenue for that next year. Moving it to a 3%, it'll produce roughly around $30,000 of additional revenue. So it's a smaller amount of impact versus the commercial, with the majority of the revenue on the water side. 75% of it comes from the commercial customers themselves, and then, like I said, the other 25% comes from residential. So the impact is less there. But I see what you're saying. I mean, it's more of a you know, I guess it's the perception out there of.
It's the optics, right?
Yeah.
It's when we're getting phone calls saying, well, regardless of what the dollar amount is, we're paying 12% more so we could keep the residential at 3%. And so that's just how I'm looking at it. And I think that's what I'm anticipating we're going to hear as feedback is whether it's punishing or not, I think that's going to be how it's perceived, right?
Yep, sure. Fair.
And thanks again, sir, for taking the time to go back and look at this again. Last time I kind of talked about proportionality. That was one of the things I was looking at in load share. So looking at the staff report, and you just mentioned it a second ago, 75% of the volume is going commercial. So I think on the residential side and on the commercial side, if it's equitable and people understand that they're paying an appropriate amount for the usage, it wouldn't be unfair. I think on the residential side too, to say, well, it's only a nominal increase, it's just, you got to be careful about your themes and messaging. If you come across as saying, well, it's just a little bit more, don't worry about it. I mean, inflation is impacting them as well with all of their other bills. So just in the conversations I've had with people and other small businesses my size, it is a smaller increase, and I think people are reasonable, but it's just taking the second look is the effort that is owed to clearly delineate to the residents and the commercial businesses that you've done your best analysis against the rate model to just not go with, it's just a little bit, don't worry about it, because that's not going to come out of anybody's pockets here, it's going to come out of their pockets. So it's just being able to be confident, and if you're talking to a business and saying 75% of it comes from commercial, that's something to think about. That's where I just kind of go back, and I get where we're going on the projections. It's a themes and messaging thing as well as a financial thing when you're talking to the residents and the businesses.
I appreciate that, because we did have that conversation in our staff meeting, and we did talk about how we're going to message that out to the public and what the appropriate messaging would be, and so that's something that they definitely have to work on, for sure.
Thanks, sir.
I agree. I think we have to message this very carefully. Again, I understand keeping the costs, as low as possible on the residential side, but the perception from the business community is that they're really being penalized, maybe, in order to keep those rates down. So I do know, Cody mentioned, inflation, the cost just to hire someone, supplies, everything has gone up exponentially in the business world. And so, we are the majority of our business customers here in Branson are not the big chain or whatever, that has lots of extra money. A lot of them struggle, just to make ends meet and to keep their doors open. So I think having to, make sure that we're conscious of that. And the other thing is, we've got this 3% increase, through 2028. Is there the possibility as supplies and different things continue to go up, are we going to have to look at it again to say, we're going to have to increase it even more before we get to 2028? Are we going to have to look at these rates again to say, this may not be sustainable at this current rate?
No, it's very valid points, and that's why we take a look at it on a yearly basis. There are some entities that will index their rate increases for a 5-year period, and they'll set, this is how much we're going to raise for this year and next year, and for the next 5 years, this is the set amount, right? What that will do for you is it'll I get concerns with doing or taking that approach because, again, you have a pandemic year like COVID, or then you see a slough off in usage in some areas, but then you came back with extraordinary, or highly elevated cost in certain areas of the industry, and that could greatly affect that 5-year index. So, it would be nice to set that index and not have to focus on this from every year to year, because we spend a lot of time devoted to this model. For one, it's the effort of trying to keep us strong and healthy, and two, but to also provide the best rates that we can for the customers, residential or commercial of our area. So looking at it from year to year, the model it does configure in a 3% increase each year in operations and maintenance cost. With inflation being up 8% last year, I think we said it was hovering around 5 or 6 maybe right now. That's just kind of a general overall, but if you look at different components that the water and sewer industry uses, our chemicals could be up 20%, 30%, where some other components would be down around 3%, 4%, 5%. So there's some items that have fluctuated greatly, and so we have to look at that every year. And so I show the 5-year projection of here's what we're looking at for this year. I was excited when I looked at the rates this year compared to last year, because the trends in the model are showing that we're able to actually reduce what I projected for last year as in a 5-year plan. So we're actually reduced that down a little bit. I'm hoping that'll continue to drop down even further as we go from year to year here. But again, I don't have the crystal ball that says what's the economics are going to do here with cost and of operations. So that's we try to prepare the best we can, but there is a possibility that, again, what I'm showing here is for rate increases proposed for the next 5 years, those will change based off of inflation and maybe even regulatory things. So as we get regulatory items that come down from above, then we have to make adjustments in operations, whether it's adding new treatment processes or new personnel to accommodate for certain requirements. That can always affect the budget as well, which would affect the rates.
I just want to say thank you to you and city staff for bringing this back to us. Excuse me. I know that there's a minimal amount, but I don't want to minimize this statement, but it is a minimal amount from what you presented last time to this time for residential. But then on the flip side, being able to go back and look at this annually, because right now the market is unsteady, and we are definitely going to have to look at this on an annual basis. Protecting our residential during this unsteady time is really important. This is a tough one too, because we want to be able to continue to have development in the area as well. Mm-hmm. So thank you for bringing both. Greatly appreciated.
Certainly. So as just a recap, and as you as the Finance Committee, are you comfortable with the 3% for residential water rate increases and 12% water rate increases for commercial, and then 6% straight across the board for sewer, for me to present to as a public hearing to the Board of Aldermen?
Kendall?
Yes, Mayor.
Yeah, let me pitch in here. I appreciated everybody's comments, and Cody, I agree with your opinions. I wanted to address the descriptive word that you used, penalty. When I was looking at this from 10,000 feet, it's because because we have the amount of tourists we have and the increase in tourists that we've had is a direct result in our operating cost for our water and sewer. Our population is not growing at the same rate as our commercial is. I don't see it as much of a penalty. I guess I would put it in the same mindset of tourism tax. The more tourists we have, the more tourism tax we receive. So I don't see that as a penalty to the business. It's a pass through because businesses will have to adjust their rates to the tourist to balance their finances. But with our relatively steady amount of residents, and we did discover that 25% of the services really are for the residential side. 3% and 12% is 25% increases. So I was really trying to stay away from increasing the residential rates because our commercial is doing so well. So part of the messaging is cities over the last several years has been doing very well. The reason our taxes are up is a direct result is our visitors are up and the visitor spend is up, which means the businesses are doing better. So when I looked at the overall, what would the operating expenses be to the residents if we did not have the tourism? We obviously wouldn't need as much water and sewer for 10 million visitors as we need for 12,500 residents. So I agree in one breath. It sounds like the business in this model that the businesses are paying a higher percentage than residential. However, the higher percentage, in my opinion, correlates with the higher amount of tourism business. So in one breath, I'll completely agree. Some businesses may look at this as the city stifling business growth. Then I balance that with, from the residential side, somebody living here, should they be paying a higher percentage because we have an increased amount of tourism? So I think those are two great arguments. I tend to lean on the side of he who is causing the increased fee, the increased usage of water and sewer should pay their percentage share of increases. And there again, the 3% and the 12% reflects the 25% usage for residential and the 75% usage for commercial.
And maybe this is just my simple mind and not,
Sure.
I mean, I'm not an economist, but as I understand all this, it's based off consumption.
That's right.
So to me, it's relative, right? If a business sees, if a hotel sees 20% more guests in any given year, they're going to consume more water, therefore they're going to pay a higher water bill. If I use 5,000 gallons in 1 month and I use 10,000 the next month, I'm going to pay a higher bill. So when I hear when you say the businesses are causing the cost to go up, well, they're paying that in the fact that they're paying based on that consumption. So that's why I made the point about when you look at the percentage increase, I don't think that's, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't think that's completely accurate to say, well, they're causing a higher cost, therefore we have to transfer that to them because they're already doing that and that they're paying much higher bills based on their consumption to begin with. But again, maybe I don't understand the way this all works, but that's at least my understanding of this system. And so that was kind of my hesitation when I saw it presented this way.
Sure. And I guess, and using that same example, which is a good example, Cody, is if a resident's usage is 5,000 gallons and a business usage is, say, 10,000 gallons, because of the increase of the cost, the chemicals, the labor, the actual operating cost, replacing valves and whatever else Kendall replaces, that amount of usage increases the amount of operating expense proportionally also. So if a residence was using 5,000 gallons, if they went up to 6,000 gallons, they will be paying a higher water bill, no different than a business paying a higher water bill because of the amount of usage. It's just that usage, and Kendall, I don't know if you have better examples, but lift pumps and all the mechanisms you have for the water and sewer to operate, that percentage of increase of operations, I think, should be divided similar to the demand. And so I hear what you're saying, Cody. The business will pay a higher dollar amount, but the percentage of increase, I think, is what we're looking at as keeping everything running the way it's supposed to. Kendall, do you have input on that?
Yeah, so, so usage, as a customer uses more water, two things take place. They would, in turn, have to pay more, like you guys have mentioned. You pay more for your usage. What's that do operationally? As customers use more water, then obviously there's more wear and tear on equipment, right? So we have a projected life cycles of equipment, and it's based off of current trends of usage, and also just environments that those particular pieces of equipment are located at. Some, our wastewater side of the industry, the equipment replacement is more often because of the harsh environments that it's subjected to, versus the water side, the clean water side. So at some point, it was decided years ago during the rate study that the city conducted that the residential would take on X amount of that burden, and then commercial would take on other X amount of the burden to keep operations and maintenance flowing. And that has been standardized, and rate increases have been across the board from there on out. But doing this, a separate percentage of increase starts to shift that dynamic a little bit. You're shifting what was originally established as far as the weight on the residential side versus the weight on the commercial side, slightly over to the commercial side even more. Pump, can't tell the difference between a residential usage and a residential usage. It just theoretically costs us the same amount of money to pump a gallon of commercial wastewater versus a gallon of residential wastewater. So it's a matter of determining, how much burden or how much weight that you want to place on that residential customers versus the commercial side. And I apologize, I don't have that history before me right now of understanding how the original separation took place. And that's something that's in my future goals as a director to educate myself on and go back through and look at those studies. And along with our current water and wastewater master plan update that we're in process of getting underway, that'd be in one of the next phases of that master plan update is to reevaluate and study that methodology as well, to come to more sound reasoning behind all of this, and bring everybody more up to speed on that. But as of today, it's just, I think it's a big thing is the message is, do you want to say that you want to place more of that weight on the commercial side, or keep it as is with the past methodology? And again, I think the big thing is just the message that we portrayed to the customers.
So Cody, in that example that Kendall used with the pump, if there was no commercial and there was only residential uses on a pump and it was pumping 2,500 gallons to service the residential side, then as those increases of maintenance for that pump, that amount of money should be paid by the residential side. When you compare it to now the pump needs to pump 10,000 gallons, there is more maintenance on the pump, and the pumps need to be replaced more often. And because it's 75% increase in the usage on that same 10,000 gallon pump, then to me, from just a level across the board, if it's the visitors, the business side, causing that 7,500 extra gallons, the extra expenses to maintain that pump, I think, should be borne by the commercial side.
Yeah, I understand that, and that's why we don't just charge everybody $100 a month for water and sewer. So again, I go back to it's based on consumption. So
Sure.
as that strain is placed in that system, as more water is consumed or more is put into the sewer system, we bill based on that consumption to account for that. So to me, that difference, that extra use there, whatever it is accounted for in the way we bill, instead of saying, okay, across the board, it doesn't matter if you're a residence or a business, everybody's just going to pay $500 a month. Well, that wouldn't make sense because a residence is not going to use as much water as a business would. And so instead, we do it based on consumption, which, again, as I understand it, accounts for that increased burden on the system. So when I see the rate increase, I'm still not connecting the dots on how that accounts for the increased burden when we're already doing that in the consumption.
Is there a uniform rate, like across the country, between residential and commercial? If it's straight consumption, you could have a uniform rate, but there's a reason why the rate model is put in place. And is there a notable separation between how they set that rate? I'm assuming they do that for a reason, because if it was simply consumption, then you would have a uniform rate and it would take care of itself. It's not performing as it needs to, even being supplemented or boosted by the tourism tax. So not to throw any wrenches in the system, but I'm just trying to understand, if it's straight consumption, then we shouldn't have two different rates. I'm thinking that the presence of commercial business in town is adding weight to the system, and if they've been paying their consumption rates and it's not keeping up, my brain isn't connecting the dots that it's simply just they're already paying their fair share, not to be a pain, but there's obviously a clear delineation between two different rates. It's not a uniform rate. So that's where the proportionality comes into play again. Is the infrastructure apples to apples? Like if we had just a straight residential system that wasn't loaded up with the Branson tourist season folks, the 7 million plus, is there not an infrastructural difference between the two? If Branson was just a 10 or 12,000 resident town, if not, then we could just have a straight uniform rate. But there's clearly an understanding that there's a difference between the two, or we wouldn't need a rate model study. It would just be use your consumption and we call it good.
So
If I can, Cody, on that example of the maintenance, and I'm trying to just connect these dots also. If the increase of servicing a pump because of chemicals and labor and all that, if the increase of a pump went up by $10 a year, what percentage of that $10 increase, how should that $10 increase be allocated? And in my mind, if a $10 increase on a certain pump went up because of chemicals, labor, and all that, then I don't see that increase being divided, $5 for residential and $5 for commercial, if we were doing the same rate increase for residential. Thoughts on that, Cody?
We're probably getting way more in the weeds on this than Kendall expected. And I'm sorry, and I'm not trying to be contrarian here, but clarify something for me on a business. When you have these separate meter sizes broken out, a business is naturally going to have a larger water meter, correct?
Yeah, correct, yes.
So by default, if I use 5,000 gallons and a business next door uses 5,000 gallons, we use the same amount, they're going to just automatically pay more to account for that difference, right?
So where the difference lies is the base rate. So the base rate would be, for each meter size is different. There's a larger meters, obviously going to have additional operating costs versus a smaller meter. The price, so that, and that base rate includes the first 2,000 gallons of usage in that base rate cost. A lot of utilities have eliminated that first 2,000 gallons out of that base rate, but we have kept it in there historically for years. Every 1,000 gallons used after that on the commercial side is billed out equally. So if you have a 3/4 inch water meter and you're a commercial customer and you use more than 2,000 gallons, that next 1,000 gallons will cost you the same as a commercial customer that has a 6-inch meter. So the price per gallon is the same. The base rates are different because of that meter size and how it equates to operations and maintenance in itself. And I'd like to go back and answer Alex's questions here. Across the country, again, we do a rate study of over 90 cities, and a lot of them in Missouri itself. We see a lot of fluctuation and methodologies and things of that nature. It's really subject to just how the community leaders want to capture the dollars to make the water sewer system work and operate. There's some entities out there will go flat rates for residential. Some entities will charge the same amount for both water, or charge the same amount for water sewer for both commercial and residential. They don't separate it out because, again, pumps don't recognize what's a residential gallon of water and what's a commercial gallon of water. It takes the same amount of electricity to pump either one. When you start adding more commercial development to a water system or sewer system, then you have larger components. You have larger components like pipes and pumps and lift stations and treatment systems, all to accommodate for additional capacity. Now, what's the ratio of as you start upping your capacity, and is it an equal increase in rates and how all that works out? I don't have that answer before you today. I need to study into that more on our system, but the whole point of the tourism tax was to offset those larger pipes, those larger capacities of pumps and that nature in itself. Let's say Branson's tourism industry, knock on wood, hopefully it never happens, but hopefully if it ever did drop out, and then the residential's customers are left with the burden of operating a system of this size, you would see their rates increase dramatically, because if you don't have the commercial customers to come in and offset that, then you've got to pay for the same operations that you would have with just less flow moving through the system, right? So less flow means less electricity, less chemicals, things of that nature. Your life cycles of your pumps theoretically should expand out even further, because you're not, the hours of operation are less in itself as well, because you're not pumping as many gallons. So it's when the original rate study was conducted, it was chose to set the base rate for residential at X and the commercial at Y. And the percentage of difference at that time, I can't tell you what it was in itself and the ratio that, how they came about that. I can give you an example of our water and sewer connection charges. So this is when new development comes into play, and they apply for a new water meter or sewer connection within the city of Branson. We charge a system connection charge, and what that money goes towards is back towards infrastructure. It goes back towards upgrades. So it's similar to our tourism dollars in itself. It's aimed at building, replacing capacity in the system. So again, it's very similar to the rates. It costs the same amount of dollars per gallon, whether it's residential or commercial, but the board, when we implemented that sewer connection and water system connection charge, they chose to discount the residential at a greater amount. So for example, a commercial 3/4 inch connection is, let's say, $2,200 for connection fee. Residential is $1,800. So they discounted it in an effort to increase or promote more residential growth within the city in itself. So to lessen the burden on the residential side and puts more on the commercial side. So it's just a matter of how the community wants to proceed forward with capturing the dollars to operate the system. And it's across the board. It's all over the place in the nation.
Makes sense, sir. Thank you. Only reason why I asked the questions is just to kind of reaffirm where I'm going with the rate difference. So the presence of a tourism tax acknowledges we're a tourist town. That's not a surprise to anybody. It's not enough to account for the cost. We acknowledge that when our utility rates model was set at one point, there was 2 different rates, or it would be a uniform rate. So there's just multiple acknowledgments that the presence of commercial business warrants not having a uniform rate. Now, what we set it at, that's for the experts in the room to determine. That's why we're super thankful for everybody that knows those things, because I can't do that. I just, as a resident and as a small business owner, proportionality is something I would expect, and I would expect that we use good reasoning, and that if it was just, well, your consumption covers it, we would have uniform rates across the board. We wouldn't segment it. We wouldn't have ordinances that lay out different numbers. So there's just multiple layers of acknowledgement that we have a responsibility to make sure that we're being proportional, whatever that might be. I'm not arguing for one percentage or another. What I don't want to do is walk to somebody and say, hey, is what it is. You know, we're going to raise, we're passing that on to you as the resident, even though we know good and well for other reasons. The guests that make our community thrive, which we have to have them, are bringing 75% load to your system. Like, that's very hard to overcome for the average person that's not spun up on this type of knowledge. So I think they're reasonable. I think the inflation impacts everything, but there's a couple of different reasons why there are separated rates. And so just making sure that it's proportional is a big deal to me and then to other folks that I've talked to. And I really appreciate it. I'm not trying to be a pain. It's just that's where I'm going when I think about everybody's viewpoint on this particular topic.
Thank you.
So Kendall, it sounds like to follow the process, at the last meeting, what you presented was an equal increase of 10% on water for both residential and commercial. And after you were asked to go back and look at it, and I really appreciate, I know the countless hours you and your team have put into this, and Ben. So this is a alternative proposal, dividing up the increase 3% and 12%. So this committee needs to decide what they want to recommend to the board. And then when this comes up in front of the board of aldermen are going to have their own opinions also. So if I'm not off base, I would think that let's get a consensus of this committee and then take that recommendation to the board.
So can I just clarify one thing? When you said you use different size pipes or whatever for different businesses, right? And there's a base rate according to what size you use. Because I was sitting here thinking, we keep talking about how the commercial is, they're taking care of the tourists or whatever, but there's a lot of small businesses here that are not tourist driven, right? That's not where their revenue comes from, that because they're taking care of locals. And so they would probably have one of the smaller size going into their business, correct? And so that's how they're paying their share, not based on tourism, but on what they actually, who they service and what they actually use. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. So the size of the water meter is the amount of volume that they're able to utilize out of the system. So the smaller the meter, the less impact they have on the system itself. So that's why the base rates are charged differently at that point.
And so in theory, there's probably some businesses here that don't exceed the 2,000 gallon that's included in that base rate or whatever. Is that correct? I think about I'll look at Cody, your size law office or a small CPA or whatever. They're not using tons and tons of water like another that is truly servicing tourism, right?
Yeah, that is correct. And you think of, and I'm looking at Jolene over here because she's very heavily involved in that and for years, but example comes to mind would be, let's say, a downtown retail business. 3/4 inch size water meter. They have an employee restroom. They just sell clothes or whatever it may be, or knickknacks and stuff and souvenirs. They don't hardly use any water, so they're just generally paying that base rate.
Okay, because I want to make sure, because when we're talking about this, again, it's all in the messaging. And so there's going to be some businesses that says, well, now I'm paying extra because the tourists are coming in, but I'm not servicing those customers. I think about a hair salon. Yeah, there's probably a few tourists when they come to town, they want to get their hair done or whatever, but the majority of their client base are local people, right? And so just want to make sure, again, in the messaging that, if you're the smaller, which I know that rate increase is going to hit, but it's not going to be for volume and volume. They're not going to be paying tons and tons extra, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you. So let me understand, this committee needs to make a recommendation that this proposal goes on to the Board of Aldermen, or is it a recommendation that the original and this one goes, or so that they can review both? I'm kind of confused. Mayor, what say you?
Well, this committee can do anything at once. I think the design was for this committee to get down into the weeds that we're getting into. And after thoughtful consideration and going through this time, is when this committee recommends to the Board of Aldermen, then the Board of Aldermen should take this committee's recommendation instead of the board going through these hours of discussion. So we can either, I think it would be appropriate for this committee to make a recommendation to the board, and then the board's going to kick it around and decide. Or I don't know if there's anything wrong with this. If this committee says, you know what, we can see the pros and cons on both sides, and we've been presented with two different plans, and what we're recommending is to present both plans to the board for the board to decide. But I think the value of having a committee like this is to have discussions that we're having and not put that burden on the Board of Aldermen to digest all this same information to come up with a decision. So
And
I
also, I'd
guess-
like to add real quick, apologize, Mayor, but
Yeah.
we've got to do a public notification on the proposed rates.
Okay,
So we have to create an ordinance and all the best of the recommended rate increase. So we need to come to a recommendation of one or the other today in my thoughts. And hopefully as we discuss that with the board, if they decide to do something different, then we have to do something on the fly, which becomes a challenge because then you have an ordinance out there, a proposed ordinance, and you have to change that on the fly, and it's a little rougher to do it that way. But again, I would definitely recommend to get to a approach that we can do a public hearing on.
So in this public hearing, if we recommend today to move this one forward, what you've presented today to move it forward, then you do the ordinance, and then when this comes before the Board of Aldermen, there'll be opportunity for the public to get up and express any concerns they have, for the Board of Aldermen to listen to those concerns, and if they need to do something different, if they decide that, then that's what they'll do. But it does give the citizens, business owners as well, the opportunity to come in and share their opinions on this prior to this being voted on by the Board of Aldermen, correct?
Correct, most definitely.
so Kendall, thank you for providing that clarification. Excuse me, and I stand corrected that, and Kendall's exactly right. For this to be a resolution and go into an actual public hearing at a Board of Aldermen meeting, there has to be a decision made on what the resolution is for the public to comment on.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments from the Finance Committee before we look for a motion to move this on?
If I can, this has been, I've been listening to the conversation too. If I can add, one of the other things is when this goes to the board, the conversation you guys have had for the last two meetings will not be held in a vacuum. We can give them, Kendall, I say the collective sense of Kendall, can kind of give them a few bullet points of what the conversation was like. Because I think the mayor's right, getting into the weeds and actually discussing this at your level, this is exactly where you guys need to be. And that way we can take that kind of conversation to the board and say, here's what the conversation was shaped like. This is some thoughts. And they have that perspective then. So the homework you guys are doing right now pays dividends in the long run. I just wanted to add that.
I knew you was going to say something, Ben, before this meeting was over with.
Thanks, Ben.
So we're looking for a motion and a second to take the presentation, the recommendations that Kendall brought today, and to recommend that it move on for review to the Board of Aldermen.
I'd like to make a motion, ma'am, to move the amended utility rates model forward for consideration.
Second.
All in favor, please say, or do we need to do this by roll call?
Yes.
Roll call would be preferred.
Denham,
Yes.
Fenton. I didn't hear that.
No.
Williams,
Yes?
Yancey,
Yes.
Milton.
Yes,
Is that a motion, Carrie? Because I have not done this before. I'm sorry. Hillary?
It is.
Yes,
It is.
motion carries. Thank you.
If there's no further business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
I
All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks,
thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.